Do you remember the cheap sandwiches grandparents made taste like restaurant food and wonder why they felt so special? Those sandwiches once stretched every dollar while still filling the table with comfort. What did they give us that we only understand now? Fried bologna sandwiches were the kind of magic only grandparents could pull off. The sort of everyday wizardry that took a slice of cheap meat and turned it into something that tasted like it belonged on a downtown diner plate. You would hear that skillet pop and hiss before you ever smelled it, and somehow that alone felt like a promise. Thick-cut bologna would curl as it hit the heat, browning until it took on that deep, savory flavor that made you forget it came from the bargain bin at the grocery store. Grandparents had this uncanny way of making simple food feel big and comforting, as if they knew exactly how to turn thrift into warmth. They would press it down with a spatula like they were working a grill at a lunch counter, then drop it onto warm bread slicked with mustard or mayonnaise. Sometimes they added a slice of cheese that melted just enough to glue everything together, and that tiny detail made the sandwich feel like a special order. Maybe it was the sizzling sound. Maybe it was the smoky smell. Or maybe it was the way grandparents cooked everything as if it were meant to matter. That sandwich was cheap and unassuming, yet the moment you bit into it, you knew it had found a permanent spot in your personal Hall of Fame. Egg and onion sandwiches were proof that you did not need much to make something stick with you, and grandparents understood that better than anyone. They would boil eggs the way only older hands know how, never cracking and always perfectly tender. Then came the onions, diced sharp and small enough to blend into the mix, but bold enough to give the sandwich its signature kick. Add a spoonful of mayonnaise or a tiny splash of vinegar, and suddenly you had the kind of filling that could feed a whole table without anyone feeling shortchanged. Grandparents scooped the mixture onto soft bread with a seriousness that made you think you were eating something far fancier. The sandwich had the creaminess of a corner deli order and the bite of something crafted by someone who knew how to stretch every ingredient. Maybe it was the onion that made it feel grown up, or the eggs that made it feel comforting, or the way grandparents piled it on thick. Whatever the reason, it tasted far bigger than its small cost. Egg and onion sandwiches were quiet generosity served between two slices of bread. Tomato and mayonnaise sandwiches were the kind of simple perfection that could only come from grandparents who understood the power of fresh ingredients and soft white bread. A late summer tomato, sliced thick and dripping with juice, could transform the most ordinary day into something memorable. Grandparents knew how to pick them, pressing gently to feel for that perfect softness that meant the tomato had lived its best life. Then came the mayonnaise, spread edge to edge with a focus that would make a professional chef blush. The first bite was always messy in the best way, juices mixing with mayonnaise until it tasted like something from a restaurant that bragged about farm fresh produce. It was cheap, but never felt cheap. These sandwiches were like a quiet family secret, something learned only by standing in a warm kitchen while a grandparent sliced tomatoes with the same knife they had used for years. Eating it felt like eating a season, tied to gardens, porch swings, and long afternoons. Joy made from bread, tomato, and mayonnaise. Grandparents never explained it. They just handed it to you, knowing it was unforgettable. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches were the closest thing to dessert you could get without anyone calling it dessert. Grandparents mashed the banana until it blended into the peanut butter, making this sweet, velvety spread that could brighten even the plainest slice of bread. It was cheap, filling, and tasted like something that should have come from a bakery instead of a quiet kitchen. Sometimes they warmed the banana or toasted the bread just enough to make everything melt together in that gooey, comforting way that stayed with you. It was a sandwich that tasted like effort, even though it cost almost nothing. Grandparents knew how to turn 3 ingredients into something that felt special, and this sandwich was proof. It reminded you of slow afternoons and simple comforts that feel distant now. Maybe that is why people still crave it today. Grandparents did not measure or follow rules. They just mashed, stirred, and spread until it felt right. And somehow, it always was. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches were a treat disguised as lunch, a bit of love disguised as food. Potted meat sandwiches were born from pantry shelves that never had much but always had enough. That small can of potted meat, easy to overlook today, was once a dependable meal when money had to stretch farther than anyone wanted to admit. Grandparents mixed it with diced onions or pickles to give it flavor that felt almost gourmet. Spread thick on soft bread, it became the kind of sandwich you relied on when time or money were running low. Potted meat had this salty, savory richness that tasted like a diner sandwich when seasoned just right. Grandparents knew how to make a can feel like a full meal, how to make you feel like nothing was missing, even if life was difficult. Eating it felt like stepping back into a kitchen built on hope and habit. They opened the can, mixed it by instinct, and served it without fuss. That simplicity was part of its charm. Potted meat sandwiches were built on resilience, care, and the belief that flavor does not depend on wealth. Sardine and mustard sandwiches were the bold, fearless meals grandparents made when they wanted flavor, nutrition, and thrift. All at once, sardines came in tins that waited on the pantry shelf like hidden treasures. Salty and tender with enough natural oil to feel restaurant-rich, grandparents mixed them with mustard, sometimes adding onions or a splash of vinegar, and spread the mixture with the confidence of someone making a seafood cafe special. And honestly, it tasted like it belonged there. Sardines had that deep, briny flavor that made the sandwich feel worldly and far more expensive than it was. These meals filled you up and stayed in your memory long after, teaching you something about trying foods that looked humble but tasted big. Grandparents valued strong flavors, meals that woke you up and proved that good food was about skill, not money. Sardine and mustard sandwiches were a small act of boldness and a thrifty masterpiece. Fried potatoes on bread were the kind of sandwich that made you feel like you had stumbled into a diner, even when you were sitting at your grandparents' kitchen table. Potatoes were one of the most reliable foods around, cheap, filling, and always ready to become something comforting. Grandparents would slice them thin or cube them small, fry them in a pan until they were crisp on the outside and soft on the inside, and then pile them between slices of warm bread. Sometimes they added a little salt, sometimes a little pepper, and sometimes whatever leftover fat they had in the pan to give it that extra restaurant flair. It was simple, but it ate like a full meal. The sandwich was heavy in the best way, warm, golden, and satisfying from the first bite to the last. You could hear the potatoes sizzling long before you sat down, and that sound alone told you that something good was coming your way. This was the kind of food that filled your stomach and your memory at the same time. It tasted like early mornings, like long afternoons, like comfort without cost. Grandparents understood that potatoes could be transformed into a dozen different meals, but this one always felt special. It had that diner-style nostalgia, that roadside cafe charm, even though it was made with nothing but potatoes, bread, and a little bit of time. Fried potato sandwiches were cheap, sure, but they carried a kind of richness you could not put a price on. Butter and sugar sandwiches were the quiet little treat that felt like a celebration even when there was nothing special going on. Grandparents would take soft white bread, spread a generous layer of butter across it, and sprinkle just enough sugar to make it sparkle. Toast it lightly, and suddenly you had something that tasted like pastry from a bakery window. The butter melted into every corner of the bread, and the sugar turned into this delicate crunch that made the whole thing feel indulgent, despite being made from the simplest ingredients in the kitchen. It was sweet, without trying too hard, comforting without being heavy, and somehow tasted like more than the sum of its parts. When grandparents handed it to you warm, you felt like you were being given a secret treasure, one of those homemade miracles that adults forget about but kids remember forever. It was cheap, but it never tasted cheap. The flavor made you feel like you were eating dessert, even though it was technically just bread, butter, and sugar. Maybe that is why it stuck with so many people. It was the taste of being young, of having someone take the time to make you something small but meaningful. Butter and sugar sandwiches were proof that the simplest foods could make the biggest memories, and that a tiny bit of sweetness could carry you a long way. Leftover roast vegetable sandwiches were the kind of meal grandparents made when they refused to let anything go to waste. After dinner, they would gather whatever vegetables were left in the pan, Fry them up in a little oil or leftover drippings, and stack them high between slices of bread. Carrots, potatoes, onions, squash, and anything else that happened to be sitting in the bowl all came together into something far better than you expected. The heat revived them, bringing back the flavors that had dulled after sitting out, and the bread turned it into a portable, handheld feast. It tasted warm, smoky, and rich, like something you would order from a corner cafe that prided itself on rustic charm. Grandparents knew how to stretch leftovers into entirely new meals, and this sandwich was one of their greatest hits. It was cheap, filling, and comforting, giving you a whole second dinner out of what everyone else would have thrown away. Eating it reminded you that grandparents never needed a recipe to impress you. They just needed a skillet, a little oil, and the sense to know that food could always be made new again. These sandwiches were thick, messy, and unforgettable, carrying with them the memory of kitchens where nothing was ever wasted and everything was always used with care. Cold meatloaf sandwiches were the unsung heroes of leftover night, the kind of meal that made you forget leftovers did not always have to feel like a downgrade. A slice of meatloaf, chilled just enough to hold its shape, was placed between soft bread and topped with mustard, ketchup, or whatever condiments were around. Grandparents knew the trick. Cold meatloaf had flavor that settled in overnight, making every bite taste even better than it did the day before. The sandwich felt like something you would order from a deli, thick, meaty, and packed with flavor that did not need any heating up. It was the definition of cheap food tasting expensive. Grandparents sliced it with the kind of confidence that came from thousands of meals served over a lifetime, and they always knew exactly how thick the slice needed to be to make the sandwich perfect. You would bite into it and suddenly remember how good simple food could be. Cold meatloaf sandwiches were proof that leftovers could shine, that yesterday's dinner could become today's comfort, and that grandparents had a way of making everything feel just a little better with the right touch. Cucumber and cream cheese sandwiches were the kind of quiet elegance grandparents brought to the table without ever calling it fancy. They would slice cucumbers thin enough to catch the light and spread cream cheese on soft bread with a steadiness that made it feel like a small treat. The cool crunch mixing with the creamy layer created a sandwich that tasted refreshing and clean. The sort of thing you might expect at a tea room even though you were sitting in a modest kitchen. Grandparents knew how to elevate simple ingredients, turning inexpensive food into something that felt peaceful and a little indulgent. When you bit into it, the crisp cucumber and smooth cream cheese made you feel like you were eating something far more expensive than it was. They used what they had and somehow made it memorable. These sandwiches tasted like calm afternoons, slow summers, and the steady comfort of people who knew how to make life feel gentle even when it was not. Ham salad sandwiches were the kind of thrift brilliance grandparents mastered without ever bragging about it. They would take leftover ham, chop it with practiced ease, and mix it with mayonnaise, relish, and a touch of mustard until it became a creamy, tangy blend that tasted like something from a small-town deli. Spread thick on soft bread, it felt like a proper lunch even though it came from scraps and habit. The smell of ham and relish filling the kitchen was enough to make anyone hungry, and the taste was always rich but never heavy, balanced even without a written recipe. Grandparents simply knew when it needed more relish or another spoonful of mayonnaise. Ham salad sandwiches tasted like comfort shaped by experience, a reminder that inexpensive food could still feel generous and deeply satisfying. They were born from frugality, but remembered as pure warmth. Potato salad sandwiches were the kind of meal that made perfect sense to grandparents, even if they surprise people now. Leftover potato salad never went to waste. It became a cool, creamy filling tucked between slices of bread, turning into something far richer than the cost behind it. The soft potatoes, the dressing, the crunch of onions or celery all blended into a hearty mixture that felt surprisingly complete. It tasted like a picnic you could hold in your hand, like summer afternoons and easy, familiar gatherings. Grandparents understood how to stretch food, and potato salad was one of those dishes that could go further than anyone expected. The sandwich was inexpensive, satisfying, and comforting in that quiet way their meals always were. They had a talent for turning yesterday's leftovers into something worth remembering. and this sandwich was one of their simplest successes. Corned beef hash sandwiches were the kind of meal that made you feel like you were sitting in a greasy spoon diner, even if you were just sitting at your grandparents' old wooden table. Corned beef hash had that unmistakable sizzle, that pan-fried aroma that filled the entire kitchen and made you feel hungry. Even if you had just eaten, grandparents would crisp it up just right, letting it brown at the edges and soften in the center until it tasted like something straight off a restaurant griddle. Then they would press it between slices of bread, flattening it slightly so the heat melted everything together in this satisfying, hearty way. The sandwich was salty, savory, warm, and deeply filling. It tasted like a blue-collar morning, the kind of breakfast you would grab before a long day of work. But when grandparents made it, it was more than fuel. It was a piece of their own memories, carried forward into yours. Corned beef hash sandwiches were cheap, simple, and unforgettable because they felt like a meal with history behind it. Every bite tasted like the countless mornings grandparents woke early, cooked quickly, and made sure everyone started the day full. They transformed canned or leftover hash into something that tasted miles above its humble ingredients. Fried egg sandwiches were a masterpiece of minimalism, the kind of breakfast that proved you did not need money to start the day with something that tasted like it came from a diner griddle. Grandparents cracked eggs with the confidence of people who had cooked thousands of them, frying each one until the edges crisped up and the center stayed soft enough to melt into the bread. A little butter, a pinch of salt, and suddenly you had a sandwich that felt warm, rich, and comforting in that way only simple foods can be. The yolk would soak slightly into the bread, turning each bite into a soft and savory mouthful that felt like a hug in food form. It was filling without being heavy, cheap without tasting cheap, and somehow felt like both breakfast and lunch depending on the day. Grandparents made these sandwiches with no fuss, no recipe, no second guessing. Just instinct and practice. And the result always tasted better than anything you could buy. Fried egg sandwiches had the quiet charm of a diner classic, something you could imagine served with a cup of coffee in a small-town cafe, yet it came from the most modest kitchen ingredients. That is why people remember them so fondly. They tasted like care, like routine, like mornings spent with someone who wanted to start your day off right. Peanut butter and syrup sandwiches were the sweet salvation of many childhood afternoons, the kind of cheap but delicious treat grandparents made when you wanted something special without spending a penny. They would spread peanut butter thick across bread and drizzle syrup over it until it created this sticky, shiny layer that tasted like some kind of homemade bakery filling. When the two blended together, the flavor became warm, nutty, and sweet in a way that made you forget this was supposed to be a budget meal. If the sandwich was warmed slightly or toasted, the peanut butter melted just enough to create a gooey texture that felt decadent. Grandparents had a sixth sense for when you needed something comforting, and this was one of their easiest fixes. It tasted like kindness, like after-school moments spent in quiet kitchens, like small joys made from even smaller ingredients. It was cheap, but the flavor felt rich. It was simple, but the memory stuck. Peanut butter and syrup sandwiches turned thrift into sweetness, and that is why they linger so deeply in people's minds. Pickle and cheese sandwiches were one of those odd-sounding combinations that grandparents made with total confidence, and once you tried it, you understood exactly why. The crunch of a pickle and the smoothness of cheese came together in a way that felt like something from a delicatessen, not a frugal home kitchen. The saltiness of the pickle balanced perfectly with the mild creaminess of the cheese, making each bite feel bright and satisfying. Grandparents knew how to pair flavors instinctively, using whatever they had on hand to create something cheap but memorable. Sometimes the sandwich was toasted, making the cheese soften just enough to cling to the pickle slices and turn the whole thing into a warm, melty, tangy treat. Other times it was served cold, which only sharpened the refreshing snap of the pickle. Either way, the sandwich always tasted like more than the ingredients suggested. It was the taste of resourcefulness, of kitchens where nothing was wasted and everything was used with intention. Pickle and cheese sandwiches were proof that inexpensive food could still feel exciting and full of personality. Fried Spam sandwiches were a triumph of thrift, the kind of meal grandparents made when they wanted something hearty that seemed more expensive than it was. Spam might have come from a can, but once it hit the frying pan, it transformed completely. The edges caramelized, the slices crisped up, and the flavor deepened into something savory and rich, almost like a specialty meat you would order in a casual restaurant. Grandparents would place the hot slices on bread with mustard or mayonnaise, sometimes adding a leaf of lettuce or a slice of tomato if they had it, turning a simple can of meat into something worthy of a menu. The sandwich was salty, satisfying, and unforgettable. It tasted like the kind of food people made when they refused to let frugality limit flavor. Fried Spam sandwiches were popular because they delivered comfort without costing much at all. They had that diner-style taste, that hot griddle energy, even though they were cooked on modest stovetops. Grandparents mastered the art of making canned meat taste like the best thing you had eaten all week, and Spam sandwiches were their shining example. Slaw sandwiches were the kind of meal that seemed unusual until you took one bite and realized how brilliant grandparents really were. Homemade coleslaw with its crisp cabbage, sweet carrot shreds, and creamy dressing made the perfect filling for a cool, refreshing sandwich that cost almost nothing. The slaw soaked slightly into the bread, softening it just enough to make each bite blend together like a salad and a sandwich all in one. It was crunchy, tangy, creamy, and surprisingly filling. Grandparents loved meals that stretched ingredients, and slaw was one of those dishes that could be made in large batches with very little money. Turning it into a sandwich just made sense. It was the taste of summer picnics, backyard gatherings, and kitchen counters covered in bowls of freshly made sides. Slaw sandwiches felt light but satisfying, refreshing but substantial. They carried the memory of families working with what they had and creating something delicious in the process. Mashed potato sandwiches were one of the most unexpectedly comforting meals grandparents ever made, proving once again that they could take leftovers and turn them into something unforgettable. Warm mashed potatoes seasoned with butter, salt, and pepper became a soft, hearty filling that turned simple slices of bread into a full meal. Sometimes the potatoes were crisped slightly in a pan before being added, giving the sandwich a golden crust that tasted almost indulgent. The flavor was earthy, warm, and soothing, like the food equivalent of wrapping yourself in a blanket. Mashed potato sandwiches were cheap, easy, and unbelievably satisfying, the kind of meal that filled you up and calmed you down. Grandparents loved food that stretched far, and potatoes were one of their greatest allies. These sandwiches tasted like frugality, yes, but also like abundance, because they gave you everything you needed without asking for much in return. They were a reminder that comfort can come from the simplest combinations when made with care. Apple butter and cheese sandwiches were the kind of quiet magic grandparents made without ever calling it special. They would spread apple butter thick across soft bread, letting that deep spiced sweetness soak in for a moment before adding a slice of sharp cheese that cut through it perfectly. The mix of fruity warmth and tangy richness tasted like something you would find in a small cafe where the menu was handwritten and the prices were kind. But at grandparents' homes, this was just lunch on an ordinary afternoon. When you bit into it, the apple butter melted slightly against the cheese, creating a flavor that felt both comforting and unexpectedly sophisticated. It tasted like autumn days, like warm kitchens, like something made with care, even when money was tight. Grandparents knew how to turn simple ingredients into something that lingered in your memory long after the meal ended. Oven-roasted peanut sandwiches were one of those simple ideas that became unforgettable because grandparents knew exactly how to coax flavor out of the most modest ingredients. They would roast peanuts in the oven until the whole kitchen smelled warm and toasty, then crush them into a chunky spread that tasted deeper and richer than anything from a store. Mixed with a little salt and just enough oil to bind it together, the spread turned plain bread into something earthy and satisfying. It had this warm, roasted flavor that felt almost indulgent, like something crafted instead of bought. Grandparents had a way of taking small things and giving them big flavor, and this sandwich was a perfect example. Fried green tomato sandwiches were the kind of meal that tasted like they belonged in a diner even when grandparents made them in a tiny kitchen with a single frying pan. Slices of firm, unripe tomatoes were dipped, dredged, and fried until the outside turned crisp and golden, while the inside softened just enough to keep a gentle bite. Layered onto bread with mayonnaise, the whole sandwich tasted bright, tangy, and perfectly seasoned. It was the kind of sandwich that made you stop and appreciate how much flavor could come from the simplest ingredients. Grandparents understood that frying a tomato was not just cooking, it was elevating. Sausage and gravy biscuit sandwiches were a masterpiece of stretching ingredients without ever sacrificing taste. Grandparents could take the smallest amount of sausage, crumble it in a pan, and somehow season and thicken it into a gravy that smelled like a full diner breakfast. They would split a biscuit, spoon that rich mixture inside, and create a sandwich that felt hearty enough for a long day of work. The warmth, the pepper, the soft biscuit soaking up the gravy, it all tasted far more expensive than it was. It was proof that with the right hands, thrift could feel luxurious. Pimento cheese sandwiches were a southern treasure that grandparents treated like a secret too good not to share. They mixed shredded cheese, mayonnaise, and bright red pimentos until the whole bowl glowed in this creamy, tangy blend that spread beautifully on soft bread. The flavor was sharp, smooth, and just a little sweet. Even though the ingredients were inexpensive, the taste felt like something ordered at a lunch counter where everything was wrapped in wax paper. Grandparents made it often because it fed many people for very little money, but the taste stayed with you long after childhood ended. Molasses and butter sandwiches were the sweet, slow comfort meals grandparents leaned on when money was tight but no one wanted to feel it. They would warm bread just enough to melt the pat of butter, then drizzle molasses over it in a glossy ribbon that soaked into every crumb. The taste was deep, earthy, caramel-like, and unlike anything you could buy in a store today. Each bite felt warm and soothing, like a dessert made from a time when luxury meant using what you had. Grandparents made these sandwiches to fill stomachs and lift spirits, and somehow they did both every time. What made them unforgettable was the way the molasses seemed to thicken as it hit the warm bread, creating this syrupy swirl that felt richer than anything that came in a bakery box. Kids loved it because it tasted like candy. Adults loved it because it tasted like relief, and everyone loved it because it tasted like home. It was proof that even the humblest ingredients could create something soft, sweet, and healing in a way modern treats rarely match. Chicken neck sandwiches were one of those meals born from necessity that ended up tasting shockingly good because grandparents knew how to work with every part of a bird. They would fry or stew the necks until the meat loosened, then pick off every tender shred with practiced patience. Seasoned well and layered onto bread, those small bits of meat created a sandwich that tasted richer than anyone expected. It was savory, comforting, and far more filling than such a humble cut suggested. Grandparents saw no shame in using every scrap. They saw a resource. And the more they worked with those necks, the more flavor they coaxed out of them, proving that a meal did not need to come from the prime cuts to taste memorable. The broth from stewed necks seeped into the meat, carrying hints of onions, pepper, and whatever herbs were growing outside in the yard. It was the kind of sandwich that felt like a reward after a long day, even though it had cost almost nothing. You learned from grandparents that good cooking was not about ingredients, but intention, and few meals showed that lesson more clearly than this one. Crispy lard bread sandwiches were a testament to the way grandparents turned the most basic ingredients into something that tasted bakery-made. They would spread seasoned lard across slices of bread and toast them until the fat melted and crisped the edges, leaving behind a rich, savory flavor that felt indulgent without costing a penny. Sometimes they added pepper or herbs, sometimes they served it plain, but it always tasted warm and deeply satisfying. It was the kind of food that reminded you comfort does not need to be complicated. The bread would come out sizzling at the edges, with faint bubbles of fat still dancing across the surface as it cooled. One bite, and the lard melted across your tongue, creating this silky, salty richness that tasted like it should have come from a bakery instead of an old cast-iron pan. Grandparents used lard because it was practical, but they kept making this sandwich because it simply tasted good. It was the kind of quiet luxury born out of thrift. Boiled hot dog sandwiches were a small but clever trick grandparents used to make something simple feel like a diner order. They would slice a boiled hot dog lengthwise and lay it flat on bread so that each bite had a full strip of meat instead of small pieces. Dressed with mustard, relish, or onions, the sandwich had the same flavors you would expect from a casual lunch counter, just made from much cheaper ingredients. It was quick, warm, familiar, and surprisingly comforting. And if you were lucky, the hot dog would still be steaming when it hit the bread, softening it just enough to make the whole thing taste even better. Grandparents liked meals that fed you fast, filled you up, and did not leave a mess behind, and this one checked every box. It felt like something made with care, even though it took only minutes. It was simple food with an unexpectedly nostalgic punch. Saltine and mayonnaise sandwiches were one of the more unusual creations that somehow tasted better than logic allowed. Grandparents would crush saltines, mix them with mayonnaise, and spread the mixture thick across bread. The texture became creamy but slightly crunchy, and the flavor tasted oddly like a mild seafood salad. It was inexpensive, filling, and strangely addictive. Grandparents made it because it used pantry staples and came together in minutes, but the taste lingered like a strange little memory that still makes people smile. There was something charming about how fast it appeared on the table, like a snack whipped up out of thin air. And even though it did not look fancy, it carried a surprising richness thanks to the salty crackers and smooth mayonnaise. It tasted like something improvised. Yes, but also like something crafted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. It was odd. It was thrifty, and it was impossible to forget. Molasses ham biscuit sandwiches were the cowboys' version of Sunday best. Cold slices of salted ham, usually left over from the previous night's big meal, were layered on fresh biscuits and slathered with a thick smear of dark molasses. It was sweet, salty, and messy enough to stain your fingers and your shirt. The molasses was strong, sometimes bitter, sometimes syrupy, but always bold enough to cut through the cured meat. On the trail or at the ranch, this sandwich felt like a reward, like someone had remembered you liked good food. Biscuits were made fresh when supplies allowed, often with lard and love, and that flaky texture paired with the slick of ham fat made this a rare treat. Cowboys carried it wrapped in cloth, eating it cold under trees or stars. It was one of the few meals that felt like a story of home, of family, of something more than work and dust. For a few bites, the world softened. Now, bologna is not what you would call glamorous, but in the 1970s, someone took that humble meat and turned it into a straight-up miracle. Enter the bologna pizza sandwich. This was not a joke, it was genius. You start with a soft hamburger bun, maybe left over from the weekend cookout. On the bottom half, you lay down a slice of bologna, and if you are doing it right, you give it a quick sizzle in a frying pan so the edges curl up like a little meatball. Then you spoon on tomato sauce, canned, homemade, whatever you have, and top it with shredded mozzarella. After that, into the broiler it goes. What comes out is pure nostalgia with melted cheese dripping down the sides and the edges of the bologna just crispy enough to give it bite. It smelled like school lunch and after-school cartoons. This was a sandwich that did not care what anyone thought. It was pizza-inspired, budget-friendly, and full of attitude. A little greasy? Sure. A little weird? Absolutely. But no one ever forgot their first one. But if bologna in a broiler felt like a stretch, get ready for the canned spread that showed up in lunchboxes, picnic baskets, and every pantry with a shelf of shame, and somehow stayed beloved. When grape jelly teamed up with bologna during the Depression, the combination created more than confusion. It birthed an unexpectedly beloved sandwich, the bologna and jelly sandwich. At first glance, pairing thinly sliced, inexpensive bologna meat with sweet grape jelly might seem like a culinary accident, but in the context of 1930s America, it was nothing short of brilliant ingenuity. Bologna was a Depression staple because it stretched meat budgets further than any cut of beef or pork ever could, appearing in kitchens nationwide as the quintessential poor man's steak. Similarly, grape jelly, often homemade from wild or backyard grapes, offered a cheap, sweet contrast readily available in most households. The salty, savory taste of bologna unexpectedly complemented jelly's sweetness, creating a sandwich quirky enough to please even skeptical palates. Interestingly, early cooking pamphlets and newspapers occasionally endorsed this odd pairing, promoting it as a practical yet flavorful way to diversify Depression-era diets. Far from being merely an oddity, this sandwich underscores how cleverly resourceful our grandparents were, turning modest ingredients into sandwiches both memorable and satisfying. Way before anyone was throwing around the word fusion, people were already stuffing taco night into a sandwich roll and calling it lunch. The taco-inspired ground beef sandwich was a bold, brilliant mess of spicy ground beef seasoned with chili powder, cumin, and whatever was on hand. This was the 70s after all. If it came in a seasoning packet, it was probably fair game. The meat got piled high into a soft hoagie roll, topped with shredded cheddar, crisp lettuce, and sometimes a few sad tomatoes trying to keep up. Every bite was an explosion of salty heat and melty cheese. It was not clean, it was not elegant, but it was delicious. This was comfort food that was borrowed from the taco truck before taco trucks were even a thing. You could find it at school cafeterias, mom-and-pop diners, and even in the occasional backyard cookout where somebody decided to get creative. The bread soaked up all that seasoned grease and somehow it just worked. You were not going to win any awards for presentation, but your taste buds would be too busy partying to care. And speaking of comfort food with attitude, the next sandwich on our list came straight from the king himself, and probably your aunt's frying pan. You have not seen experimental until you have seen a tuna and apple sandwich. Exactly what it sounds like and worse in reality than in your imagination, a tuna salad mixed with chopped apple slices on white bread. Yes, that is literally the entire concept, and no matter what the fusion food crowd tries to say, we are not trying it or buying into the hype. If only to satisfy the curiosity inside us and scratch that must-try-everything itch would we want this back. But strangely, people in the 70s had the opposite opinion. Cans of Pink Lady tuna and farmers market apples were apparently their idea of a good meal back then. Do you think they were onto something? Maybe we are jumping the gun and should take a note out of their book about being open to new tastes. Sourdough starter bread with cold tallow and pepper was not a celebration. It was what you ate when your firewood ran low and your hopes ran lower. Dense, tangy slices of sourdough, baked days earlier, were spread with cold beef tallow scraped from a tin, then dusted with black pepper if you had it. No warmth, no sizzle, just calories and survival. This sandwich was the miner's standby, the trapper's fallback, the widow's winter lunch. Tallow kept you going. Sourdough kept you sane. You had to chew slowly, not just because the bread was dense, but because the quiet made everything feel heavier. There was no illusion here. It was a meal made by necessity, not desire. But it did its job. It filled you up. It reminded you that tomorrow might be better, or it might not. Either way, you would still eat. In a time when food waste was practically unthinkable, even potato scraps found their way onto dinner tables as an ingenious sandwich filling known as the fried potato peel sandwich. During the Great Depression, resourcefulness wasn't just admired, it was essential for survival. Potato peels, typically discarded today without a second glance, became the surprise stars of family meals when frugal cooks discovered that frying them crisp and sprinkling a touch of salt transformed kitchen waste into an affordable delicacy. Potatoes were abundant, inexpensive, and nutritious, making them a cornerstone of Depression-era cooking. Yet their peels often held valuable nutrients, something homemakers recognized instinctively, long before modern nutritionists praised potato skins as vitamin-packed. Clever cooks stretched resources by saving these peelings, crisping them to crunchy perfection, and layering them between slices of bread for a sandwich that was satisfying, flavorful, and, importantly, dirt cheap. Remarkably, newspapers and food columns of the 1930s openly suggested frying potato peels to add bulk and nutrition to scarce diets, turning desperation into culinary inspiration. shrimp salad rolls were the fancy cousin who only showed up at baby showers and bridal brunches, but when they did, they made sure you noticed. These sandwiches were served cold, creamy, and full of old-school charm. Chopped shrimp got mixed with mayonnaise, a little diced celery for crunch, and maybe a squeeze of lemon juice if the recipe came from someone who read food magazines. The mix got spooned onto a buttered roll, soft, pillowy, and lightly toasted if you were lucky. It was rich but light, simple but elevated. You were not scarfing it down with fries and soda. No, this one came with iced tea in a glass and maybe a napkin folded just right. It was the kind of sandwich that made you sit a little straighter. Perfect for luncheons, community cookbooks, and any moment where finger foods and floral plates were involved. But here is the thing, it was good, really good. The shrimp brought just enough sweetness. The celery kept it from being too heavy, and the bread soaked it all in without falling apart. It was a sandwich that whispered luxury in a decade where not much else did. And if shrimp salad was for special occasions, the next sandwich took something sacred, Thanksgiving dinner, and made it work any day of the week. If you were a regular at lunch counters in the 1970s, there was one cold cut that had a mysterious charm: pickle and pimento loaf. It had a look that was hard to ignore. A pale pink meat dotted with bright green pickle bits and tiny flecks of red pimento, like a mosaic made by someone who really loved sandwiches. It came sliced thin from behind the deli glass, slapped between white bread with a dab of mayonnaise, and wrapped in wax paper with a soda on the side. You did not question it. You just ate it. The flavor? Tangy, savory, and weirdly sweet, but not in a bad way. It had the texture of bologna, the bite of pickle, and the color scheme of a Christmas tree. For some reason, it vanished from most grocery shelves by the end of the decade. Maybe tastes changed, or maybe we just stopped putting pickles inside our meat. But back then, it was an easy go-to, a bit of fun, and a total conversation starter if you pulled it out during lunch break. Of course, if you thought that sandwich was messy looking, just wait until we dive into the one that was literally impossible to eat without getting sauce all over your hands and loving it. Corned beef tongue with mustard in between fluffy bread slices. Okay, beef tongue might be way out of your palate, but don't disregard the corned beef tongue sandwich just yet. For something to fade from history, it's got to cement its spot there first, right? Can't do that if you don't bring something to the table. Perhaps this one will bring a lot more than you'd expect. It's traditionally prepared with carrots, garlic, red pepper, black pepper, salt, onions, mayo, and spice like bell pepper, paprika, and some garnishes like lime and parsley. So we already have the makings of a savory delight. You really want to keep a close eye on the beef tongue while it's in the pot, though. It can alter the flavor or dry it out fast. Though this sandwich has faded into the past now, the intricacy and delicacy through which it was created is a marvel to look back at. Maybe one day, this sandwich will come back at fancy restaurants, but for now, it remains a figment of the past. You knew the Red Devil logo before you ever tasted it. That Underwood deviled ham can have a certain energy to it, bold, strange, and just a little too happy for what was inside. Still, one taste and you got it. Deviled ham salad was the low-key hero of school lunches and late-night sandwiches. It was creamy, salty, a little tangy, and just weird enough to make you wonder how it became so popular. Mix that canned meat paste with mayonnaise and relish, maybe a dash of mustard if you were daring, and you had a spread that knew how to work a slice of white bread. It was chilled, it was comforting, and it stuck to the roof of your mouth like a secret you could not wait to tell. This was the kind of sandwich you did not brag about, but secretly loved. And it was there for you, on road trips, in brown bags, and even at midnight when you could not sleep. It never looked fancy, but it never needed to. Deviled ham was a flavor bomb dressed up like a cold cut. But if you wanted something a little fresher, a little more deli-style, then nothing hit quite like a stack of corned beef with a side of slaw and just enough spice to make you pay attention. Beef drippings and onion sandwiches were what happened when the roast was long gone but the skillet still remembered. You would take a scrap of bread, soak it in the beef grease left behind in the pan, and then fry up some sliced onion until it was dark, blistered, and sweet. The sandwich was often assembled right in the pan, one piece of bread flipped onto the onions to soak up all the remaining fat. It smelled like heaven and looked like hardship. This was lunch for the family that had already stretched one piece of meat across 3 meals. The flavor was unbelievable, meaty, smoky, with the kind of richness you can only get when you are desperate enough to turn drippings into dinner. It was greasy enough to shine through brown paper and comforting enough to taste like Sunday morning on a Wednesday night. You did not need a full roast to eat like you had one. You just needed memory and fire. Throughout the hardships of the Great Depression, creativity in the kitchen became as vital as bread itself, leading to culinary experiments that modern taste buds might find curious. Among these unusual creations was the humble yet surprisingly refreshing cucumber and sugar sandwich. Thinly sliced cucumbers, lightly dusted with sugar, sandwiched between slices of bread. Sugar may seem extravagant for the 1930s, yet households often had small reserves carefully rationed for moments exactly like this, transforming bland cucumbers into something akin to dessert. Garden cucumbers, prolific and hardy, grew abundantly, becoming the unsung heroes of many Depression-era meals. Interestingly, cucumbers were favored because they matured rapidly, providing a dependable source of nutrition when pantry staples were uncertain. Clever homemakers discovered sprinkling sugar over cucumbers masked their watery blandness, turning a simple vegetable sandwich into an affordable treat. Even kids who usually avoided vegetables happily ate it. In fact, this unlikely pairing became popular enough to feature in homemaking pamphlets of the era, billed as a sweet sandwich children would actually finish. You know it is serious when your childhood lunch starts with a loud sizzle. Fried bologna and mustard was never supposed to be a star. It was just something people made when they ran out of ideas or groceries. But it had that wild card charm. Thick-cut bologna, the kind with that red plastic skin you had to peel off, got tossed on a hot skillet until it puffed like a mini volcano. It would curl at the edges, crispy and brown, and just when you thought it was done, it would start to sing. Slap that onto a slice of Wonder Bread, squeeze on yellow mustard like you mean it, and top it with another slice. No lettuce, no tomato, no distractions. This was the sandwich that knew what it was. It smelled like school lunches and weekend trips to the lake. It was cheap, easy, and always hit the spot. Nobody was trying to impress anybody with this. But somehow, it never let you down. The meat might have been humble, but it had attitude, and the mustard made sure it got noticed. Now, if that one felt like a memory, wait until we talk about the sandwich that brought the diner straight to your house, griddle grease and all. In the bleak economic landscape of the 1930s, the trusty carrot, often abundant and dirt cheap, was quietly elevated from supporting actor in stews to star ingredient in sandwich spreads like the carrot marmalade sandwich. Homemade carrot marmalade spread generously over stale bread might sound peculiar today, but during the Great Depression, it showcased a brilliant combination of thriftiness and culinary creativity. When sugar became scarce and costly, innovative homemakers cleverly utilized carrots' natural sweetness, simmering them slowly into a thick, jammy preserve to mimic traditional fruit marmalade. Notably, carrots were among the most reliably available vegetables during the Depression. Their hardiness meant nearly anyone could cultivate a patch, even with limited gardening skills. Families often had surplus carrots, providing an ideal solution to the era's pervasive hunger. To avoid waste, stale bread, previously destined for the compost heap, was refreshed by this sweet and slightly tangy marmalade, transforming it into an unexpectedly pleasant treat. Despite its humble origins, carrot marmalade gained popularity, prompting home economists of the time to distribute official recipes for this vitamin-packed, budget-friendly spread. Ham and banana sandwiches are less digestible both literally and figuratively than most of the list, but they actually worked quite well. The trick was in how you sliced them, because if the banana slices were fat and thick while the ham was thin, you would have a really overly sweet sandwich. Meanwhile, if you did the opposite, then you would have a mushy sandwich that did not have any real flavor. If you did get the proportions right, and most people did after their first few tries, Then you had a 70s DIY delicacy with simple ingredients. It made sense why most people did not know how to make a good one, because it was not common. People who lived in other decades hated fruit and meat mixes of savory dishes, but they had a lot more room to make an impression with the crowd in the 70s. Maybe people felt very tropical for a decade? The sandwich would be quite an interesting addition in menus today. Pemmican and berry flatbread wraps were survival food dressed as tradition. Born from the native scouts and fur trappers who knew the land better than anyone else, this rough, nutrient-packed mash was made from dried meat, rendered fat, and crushed berries. Rolled into dense cakes or spread inside fry bread or ash cakes, pemmican could last for months and carry a man through winter. It was chewy, often sour, and left a taste that clung to your teeth. The berries, usually choke cherries or blueberries, added tartness and a rare flash of sweetness to the otherwise heavy meat paste. This was not a sandwich you bit into for flavor. It was fuel, medicine, history in your hands. Wrapped in whatever bread you had, it made the difference between starvation and another mile down the trapline. And though it came from necessity, pemmican wraps were made with purpose and pride. It was one of the few foods of the Wild West that carried with it both survival and heritage. And when the wagons moved west and hunger followed, this ancient sandwich came along for the ride. In the 1930s, leftovers weren't something you tossed. They were tomorrow's lunch. That mentality gave birth to dishes like the cold baked bean sandwich, a Depression-era staple composed of leftover baked beans spread generously between bread slices. Though beans today might evoke images of summertime barbecues, in Depression kitchens, they symbolized frugality and survival. Beans were economical powerhouses, affordable, nutritious, and easy to cook in large batches. Families routinely simmered huge pots, using beans for multiple meals, stretching their budgets and pantries to their absolute limits. After hot bean suppers, resourceful homemakers cleverly repurposed any remnants, spreading them cold onto bread to create an easy, protein-rich sandwich for lunchboxes the next day. Newspapers of the period promoted beans as an essential pantry staple, boasting about their nutritional benefits and cost-effectiveness, while quietly ignoring their less glamorous qualities, perhaps for the best. Oddly enough, baked beans in sandwiches wasn't an entirely new idea. British households had long enjoyed bean buddies, proving thriftiness travels well. Creamed chipped beef on toast, or as anyone who ever served in the military will tell you, SOS. No, not a cry for help, though it looked like one. This was dried beef, shredded and stirred into a thick, milky white sauce with a bit of pepper and sometimes a touch of Worcestershire if you were fancy. Then it got spooned over toast, or biscuits, or whatever bread you had. It was a direct descendant of World War II rations. But by the 1970s, it had made its way into American homes, school cafeterias, and greasy spoon diners across the country. It was salty. It was creamy. It looked like a mistake, but somehow, it kept getting made and loved. It was affordable, filling, and tasted better than it had any right to. Parents made it because it used cheap pantry ingredients. Diners served it with coffee refills. Kids ate it because they did not know any better, then grew up craving it again. It might not be pretty, but it is unforgettable. Still, not everything on this list is heavy. Some sandwiches were just simple, clever ways to use what was left on the breakfast table, and a little sweet on the side. The turkey and cranberry sandwich was a straight-up post-holiday miracle. For decades, it was the unsung hero of Thanksgiving leftovers. But somewhere in the 1970s, it graduated. This was no longer just a thing you threw together on Black Friday. It became a deli menu regular, a cold-cut superstar. Thinly sliced roast turkey, piled high on Hearty sandwich bread, usually with a swipe of mayonnaise or stuffing if you were lucky. Then came the game changer, cranberry sauce. Not the fancy kind either. We are talking about the jiggly canned stuff that still held the shape of the tin. Spread it on thick and it brought a tart sweet punch that made the dry turkey sing. The contrast of savory meat with that jammy cranberry hit your mouth like a leftover-themed love letter. And the best part? You did not need a holiday to eat it. It was portable nostalgia, a bite-sized reminder of family dinners and paper plates stacked high. Every bite was warm, even when served cold. But if cranberry sauce and turkey were a love story, the next sandwich was more like a wild experiment that somehow worked, one that turned a jar of spread and a couple pickles into a lunchtime classic. The scrapple sandwich is exactly what the name suggests: fried slices of scrapple on bread. Traditionally, this sandwich would be sliced and prepared in a skillet, under a thick layer of eggs. It definitely became popular around the Maryland to New York district, but the recipe itself is properly ancient. An 1853 extract from a cookbook advises using pork that wouldn't be suitable for sausage. It was also popular for its health benefits. It can be made in a variety of ways, and some people include crispy cabbage on top and make it into a waffle with mayo. Mix and match and see what works best for you. Maybe you'll find something worth sharing. But for now, the scrapple sandwich can only be something you create. With its popularity last seen in the mid-1850s, this sandwich is something that we can only find in old extracts now. Scrap sausage and apple chokecherry chutney rolls were the Wild West version of sweet and savory. Whatever bits of sausage were left, spiced pork, beef, even squirrel, were mashed, fried, and rolled into rough bread with a dollop of wild chutney made from apples and foraged chokecherries. The result was something almost elegant, though no one at the time would have called it that. The chutney was tart, almost bitter, but balanced the grease and salt of the sausage like it was meant to. You would make these sandwiches for long rides, special meals, or when someone needed cheering up. You could wrap it in wax cloth or eat it right off the griddle. Either way, it was warm, sticky, and full of contrast. Sweet fruit and wild meat, smoke and sugar. These sandwiches were the kind you remembered long after you had eaten them. They were resourceful and emotional. They made use of everything, even sadness. In Depression-era America, homemakers learned quickly that flavor often resided in the drippings left in their skillets. Bacon grease, now casually discarded, was prized as liquid gold, giving rise to imaginative dishes like the lettuce and bacon grease sandwich. At first glance, combining crisp lettuce with bacon drippings might seem contradictory, like ordering a diet soda with your large fries, but during the lean 1930s, it made perfect sense. Bacon, when affordable, provided protein, but every precious drop of rendered fat was meticulously saved in kitchen jars for future meals. Lettuce, on the other hand, was a garden-friendly crop, inexpensive and abundant, offering essential freshness and vitamins. Clever cooks of the time combined these humble ingredients, lightly dressing freshly picked lettuce leaves in warm bacon grease, sprinkling them with salt, then sandwiching them between bread slices. Surprisingly delicious, the grease transformed mundane lettuce into something savory and satisfying. Historical cookbooks and government-issued pamphlets frequently promoted bacon fat as an affordable seasoning, suggesting it could practically perform culinary miracles. Now we are talking classic. Corned beef and coleslaw on seeded rye is one of those sandwiches that knew how to make an entrance without raising its voice. You would find it wrapped in wax paper at your local deli, or sitting proud on a tray next to a pickle spear and a bag of chips. The corned beef was thin-sliced but packed with punch, salty, tender, and just fatty enough to remind you this was not diet food. Then came the slaw. Not too creamy, not too dry, with just the right crunch to cut through the richness of the meat. Pile that high between two slices of seeded rye, sturdy, peppery, with that classic bite, and you had something special. This was the kind of sandwich that told you to sit down and take your time. It did not rush. It did not play games. It was the kind of thing you ordered when you wanted to feel like an adult, even if you were still wearing platform shoes and listening to disco on cassette. Deli counters made legends, and this one was a heavy hitter. But if corned beef was too bold for your taste, there was always its milder cousin, the quiet, sweet-talking ham salad that somehow became a staple without anyone noticing. Gardeners facing Depression-era hardship didn't toss away unripened tomatoes. Instead, they transformed them into simple yet surprisingly tasty sandwiches, notably the green tomato sandwich. Thinly sliced, salted green tomatoes carefully placed on buttered bread became a clever culinary solution to avoid waste when economic uncertainty made every vegetable precious. Green tomatoes were plentiful during the cooler months when fully ripe tomatoes weren't always achievable, ensuring these tangy, firm slices found their way onto many lunch plates. Remarkably, green tomatoes offered not only budget-friendly sustenance but valuable nutrients, including vitamin C, essential for families with limited access to fresh produce. Cooking columns from the 1930s enthusiastically endorsed green tomatoes as affordable, versatile pantry staples, though often jokingly acknowledging their tartness as an acquired taste. Resourceful homemakers cleverly balanced the tomatoes' acidity by spreading bread generously with butter, turning the sour slices into surprisingly palatable sandwiches. The green tomato sandwich is a vivid example of how necessity drove creativity in the kitchen, proving to skeptics everywhere that sometimes even unripe produce could shine brightly in a humble sandwich. If even one of these sandwiches stirred a memory, drop your favorite in the comments and hit like and subscribe so we can keep cooking up more moments just like this.